we had the election going on, and thought Gore was going to win, and we were actively helping here in Pennsylvania. Ed Rendell, who was our mayor and past district attorney, ultimately governor of Pennsylvania, very good guy, was then head of the Democratic National Committee. So my mother-in-law on Election Day 2000 happened to call me about 4 o'clock, and she was apoplectic, very upset, because she tried to punch a hole for Gore, but she thinks she voted for Buchanan. And the elder people in Florida, in Boca Raton, in that area, were having all kinds of problems with these ballots. They didn't punch properly. They didn't. It was a junk piece of election equipment. So we were very suspicious of the whole thing. I call Ed up, and he calls me back. We talked. He said, "Well, let's see what's blooming." And of course, I guess it was around 4 a.m. in the morning or early the next day. I get a call. He said, "Something's up over there. Can you find out what's going on? Put your parachute on and help us out." And he didn't use the term pro bono, but we don't have any money to pay you. And of course, he knew I was very active supporting Gore, and I said, "All right, I'll go down there and see what's going on." And I called a couple of my friends who were Florida lawyers in Palm Beach County, and I get down there a day or so later, and I said, "Wow, it's wild down there." People are very upset. And my standard reaction in those days was to file a class action. So I said, "You know what? I call that, I'm going to file a lawsuit for an injunction, a class action on behalf of all the people in Palm Beach County and in Florida initially to stop Harris, who was a woman who was the Secretary of State of Florida, because Florida at that time was being run by the Republicans." I filed for an injunction against Harris. She was about to certify the Palm Beach County results. And and lo and behold, I get an injunction stopping her from certifying the election. And that is how Bush versus Gore gets started. And then you had to hold a hearing within 10 days under Florida law, because we got a temporary restraining order, and the Republicans were going nuts. Lawyers were floating in from all over the country. I never saw so many lawyers in one place. I thought Florida would sink from lawyers. We get judges recusing themselves. They have a right to not take a case if they think they have a conflict. 5 judges recused themselves in 1 week. We finally ended up with a Judge LaBarga, who is a past Republican head of the Cuban American Club of Palm Beach County, and he actually did the right thing. I tried to get him to accept statistical evidence. We had 5 of the top statisticians in the United States who all volunteered without pay to come to Florida. And 2 of them were Republicans, by the way, to show how it couldn't be that what happened in Palm Beach County, that Gore had actually won the county by at least 3,000 votes. He didn't buy that, he didn't want to, but he did order the recount. And he also gave instructions of how the ballots were to be counted. The dimpled stop and the hanging chads, because I still think to this day that those ballots were designed to fail on the Democratic end, to have the Buchanan hole fall out, the Gore hole to hang, and I think it was created, and we traced it to Addison, Texas, where they were made. The whole world was watching us at that time. And Gore got involved at that point, and his, lawyers, they said, "Well, we're going to bring in what I call the name brand lawyers at that time." I was not a big name brand. I was known over here in this region. So they changed directions. They decided to ask us to back off in our case in Palm Beach County. I had recommended that we focus our efforts on the entire state, not just a few counties. And the reason for that is you had to have, you can't discriminate amongst counties and towns under Florida law. That's what my friends were telling me who were lawyers. That's what my research had indicated. And we should look for a recount for the entire state. To my knowledge, I was the first lawyer to file in Florida. We started that litigation. And that's how it all began. It was my idea to start with a class action to get the injunction. It was my idea that we needed the recount, and it was my strong push to check in other parts of Florida because we began the process of looking at other counties in Florida, and we were actually involved in several counties getting information together. Gore won by at least 50,000 votes. Worst loss of my life. Not because it was a lost case, but because of what it did to this country. Here we have Justice Scalia with his kids representing Bush in the Supreme Court. And of course, I'm sure they had no inkling what it would lead to. They thought it was the best thing possible for the country. It wasn't. The people understood in Florida what was the best. The majority voted for Gore by far. We then ended up with the philosophy of greed, as I view it, the philosophy of war. We ended up in the Iraq War, led to Afghanistan, it led to the Taliban today. All this, in my view, was a substantial result of that loss, because I think if Gore had won, this never would have happened.